Alright, so what you see in the vise is kind of my rendition of the generic Mayfly Nymph. Now, if you were to go on YouTube and just type that in, Mayfly Nymph or generic Mayfly Nymph, you'll come across some other tires that are great tires that have a pattern that is very, very similar to this. You'll find a lot with bead heads, then add lead wire and everything, and that's cool. You could do that too. But what I have here is, like I said, my rendition, and I'm going to use CDC for the legs. We're going to keep this thing lightweight, so you will need some extra weight to get it down. And if I tie it just right during the video, I'll show you how to put that little, sometimes they call it a bubble back or a split back. Split back is probably the more common term, but it kind of looks like the beginning stage for the emerger of a Mayfly nymph. So hold on tight. We're going to go over some really cool techniques on this, and then you do this a couple times and you can let your creativity flow. So what I am putting in the vise is a size 14. Let me get that straight. A size 14 times 1 long wet nymph hook. What I'm going to be using for my thread is iron gray 8/0 uni thread. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start my thread in the 3rd position, and if you don't know what that means, it means that I'm starting my thread a 1/3 of the distance back, need my pointer here, from behind the eye. So when you're building a fly, you're going to have your thorax up in here, and you're going to have your abdomen back in here. So if you're comfortable starting it back here in the 3rd position, which is just a little forward of the halfway point. If you're comfortable doing that, great. You can start it right here and wrap back. If you're not, and you don't know how to get to there, what you can do is you can start definitely a bodkin width behind the eye, and I'll show you that real quick here for those of you that haven't been following me. So I'll start my thread right there, and I'll take my bodkin, and I'll make sure that my thread is 1 width of this bodkin behind the eye. My bodkin is basically the width of that hook eye. So you'll see a lot of people on their videos say start eye length back or something to that effect, and and that's good. You can do that. I like to have a physical tool. So, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start it in the 3rd position, right there, and I'm going to wrap back. I'm going to use touching turns, get my thread started, go back a dozen turns or so, and trim off my tag, and now I'm going to continue. Sorry, I got to move my light here, it's in my way. Now I'm going to continue wrapping towards the back. When my thread reaches the hook point, or just about the hook point, I'm going to put another one in. So when I'm right there, what I'm going to do is I want to create a dubbing loop. And for those of you that don't know how to do a dubbing loop, it's actually pretty simple. What we're going to do, I'm trying to figure out how to do this without blurring the camera, is I'm going to, I'll tell you what, let me zoom out so you can see it. I'm going to take my finger and pull some thread around my finger. I'm going to take my thread and wrap it back around. Sorry, I got a little sniffle there. Wrap it back around, hanging on the front side. Now let me zoom in so you can see that. So I got my finger there. I'm going to wrap it right back in front so it sticks on the front side. And I've kind of got this little pendulum looking deal here. Now I'm going to take that, I'm going to draw it up to the top side, and I'm going to start to wrap back. And as I do that, you can see that I'm starting to lay my little pendulum down. And what I'm trying to achieve is to have one piece of thread on my far side and one piece of thread on my near side. And what we're doing here is we're laying the foundation to help split the tail. We're going to have a 3-pronged tail, and it can be very tricky to put one of those in, and this is kind of a shortcut or an easy way to do it, but you gotta keep that split and wrap back. I'm going to wrap that back to the barb so that it looks about like that. You can kind of see I've got my one piece of thread hanging out over here, which is off to the side, and one piece over here hanging off to the side. This will be my far side up top, my near side or tire side at the bottom. And we're going to take our thread back to the barb. Next, what I want to do is I want to get 3 pheasant tail fibers. Now I've already pulled these, and what I want to do is I want to get them laying right next to one another, and so the tips line up pretty close. I got that one that's just straggling a little bit there, so we have it something like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually lick these. I'm just going to kind of run them through my mouth. And we got to get our distance. And for the distance on this, we want to have a full shank length. So from behind the eye to where my thread is. Okay. Oop, don't split them out. We want to try to keep them laying flat. No, don't do that to me. Of course, they're going to do that to me now that I'm recording. Normally I pull these right off the stem, but I'd already pulled quite a few off by mistake, so I'm trying to use those. Use up the material if you got it, right? So I'm going to lay it right across the top of the hook shank and get my distance. I'm going to transfer that distance to my left thumb, left index. I'm going to put it right on top of where my thread is. And you can take a little practice, but I want to try to keep that straight on top, or flat on top of the hook shank. Something like that. You can kind of see they're still laying on top of each other, and that's okay. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to wrap it underneath, between, you can see that it's between my dubbing loop and the bottom side of my pheasant. And what that's going to do is that's going to create a little prop back here so that my tail will help stick up. Okay, so as long as we have it on top, that's what we're looking for. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take our thread and we're going to start wrapping with touching turns going forward. You don't actually have to have touching turns here, but if you've followed me for any sort of time, you'll know that I like to practice with every turn of the thread, keeping a nice underbody. Another little trick I'll show you here is, if you notice, I'm keeping that on top as I'm wrapping. So what I'm doing is when I'm wrapping this forward, I'm pulling up, loose wrap over, pull up, loose wrap over, pull up. And that keeps the material on top, or just about on top. So now we've got our tail tied in up front. We're going to trim that out, and if you got a little lip there, that's fine. It's not a big deal. So what we got to do now is we got to open these up. open our tail up because we want to have 3 prongs that look, whoop, you can't quite see it, but they look kind of like this. That's going to represent a mayfly tail and the nymph stage. So we want to have something that looks about like this. You can kind of see that. And we want to have them all kind of flat. That's why we put that little or that wrap underneath back here just a minute ago. That helps keep these all kind of on a plane. I know they're not perfect. They don't have to be perfect, but you do want to kind of have them somewhat close. Now, this dubbing loop, what we're going to do, I'm going to turn this to the side so you can see it a little bit. Now we've got 2 sides. My far side, which is up top. And we can just do this one at a time. We're going to take that and we're going to go right between the middle and the top one. And we're going to do the same thing with the bottom side, right between the bottom one and the middle one. And now my thread is splitting those open. And so what that's doing is that's going to keep those guys open. I'm going to draw that directly on top of the hook shank, just like this. You can see how those are keeping open. If you pull too tight, one way or the other, you'll see that how everything moves. So you want to be kind of gentle here. We're going to just lay that thread right down on top. You can kind of use your fingers to work everything where you need it. So we want to keep it open at an equal distance if you can. This is a tricky little maneuver, but this will really help if you can learn how to do it with pheasant tail when you work with something like fibbits or paintbrush tips. It'll help. So now that I've got that, I'm just going to put one loose wrap over, and I'm going to start wrapping back. I'm going to put in about 3 or 4 turns and stop. I'm going to get rid of this guy because it'll get in the way and we don't need it. However, remember how to do that dubbing loop because we're going to do another one here in just a second. And so I'm going to go about halfway down and stop. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my pheasant tail. Okay, this is getting up towards the tip where it doesn't have that whole natural look to the tips. Probably should have mentioned this before. So when you have a natural pheasant tail, you can kind of see how out towards the tips it has this like golden. Let's bring it a little closer so you can see it. You can kind of see how it has these golden fibers that come off, right? So here's like your gold part, and then it comes off into this like natural, real pretty color. As you work your way up towards the tip, you can see that it doesn't have that. These are a little more webby. They like to stick together a little bit more. And so I like to use this portion for my tail and this portion for my back or my wing case. And so we're going to use this portion up in here. Oop, my finger's out of camera. There you go. Up in here. We're going to use that portion there. So for this part. So I'm going to go and I'm going to draw some out. And what I'm looking for here is about 5, no less than 4, no more than 6 individual fibers. So what I get there, 6. That'll work. And I'm going to pinch and pull the stem from the fiber. Now, to get a really nice back, we've got to keep these all flat. And so again, I'm going to wet these by just putting them in my mouth and sliding them out. Now, again, this is natural. This is natural pheasant tail. This is not dyed. If it's dyed or you're using dyed feather, maybe you should get like a little sponge or something. So I'm going to lay these right on top. I'm going to try to keep those as flat as possible. And I'm just going to do a couple loose wraps. It's going to move on you a little bit. Don't worry about that. You'll see that I'm kind of twisting it back up top. It doesn't really matter a whole lot whether you're going to tie the top side of the feather or the underside of the feather, just as long as they're all flat. And all that's going to do is help you get the nice back to it. So I'm going to wrap back to about the hook point. To back off here. It's not, I tied that in at an angle because I'm trying to do it on camera so you can see it. Alright, I think I got it there. Yeah, that's much better. So you want this, you can kind of see you want this flat part right across the back. Okay, so next when I get to the hook point, I'm going to come in, I'm going to make another dubbing loop with my fingers and come over. So I'll do it again real slow. I know a lot of people struggle with this. So I've got my finger there, right? I'm making like a U shape. I'm going to come underneath the hook. You can kind of see how it makes a pendulum. I'm going to wrap my thread around a little pendulum point. And I'm going to wrap that back a few turns. And this guy is a total pendulum. It'll swing back and forth. It's all locked in. However, what we're going to do this time is we're going to come in with our scissors and we're going to trim one side of it to make it one piece of string. We don't want the pendulum. We just want one piece of string. So what we're doing there is we're actually preparing for our ribbing, because that is going to be the ribbing of the fly. And we're going to take our thread and we're going to wrap this pheasant tail back straight across the back. Now if you get to your tail with your thread and it's starting to move everything down, you've gone far enough. If you have a little bump back here left in the back, don't worry about it. It's all good. Leave it there. So next what I'm going to use, and I'll kind of show you here, I found this dubbing and it's similar to yarn, but it's this Wopsy Camel dubbing. It's just an all-purpose dubbing. So if you have yarn, or you go to the craft shops and find some cheap yarn, you can totally do this. I'm going to do this in cream. I'm not really sure that's camel dubbing, by the way, but or camel fur. But anyway, so you're gonna yarn will work too. So you're just gonna get some stuff like this, and we want it in cream or a light brown, and we can come in and trim this out too. We don't need those anymore. Should have done that a minute ago. So I'm going to turn my vise to the side, and a lot of this looks harder than it really is. There's some technical work in here, but you know, do this a few times, and there's some really good techniques on this fly that will you can really expand on these techniques into other flies. And so I'm just going to lick my fingers and kind of twist this on a little bit. So I've got a little noodle going or started, and I'm going to slide that up. And you'll see I'm pulling to the back to try to get that aligned with where my pheasant tail is. I'm going to put one wrap in, work my way around the hook point there, and now that I've got that in place, I can start to twist again. I'll put another wrap right over on top, and now I'm going to start working my way forward. If you need to, you can lick this stuff, or I'm sorry, lick your fingers and keep twisting it, or use your fingers to pinch it in place. Either or. There we go. Unfortunately, this stuff does like to catch on that hook shank. And so, as we wrap forward, we're looking for an even or a slightly tapered body going forward. And if you have a little thread showing through, don't worry about it. Let it show through. Give your fly a little character. And I do a couple there. And so we're going to take this right back up to where we started. That's why I started my thread back here, so I know exactly where my dubbing needs to end. Okay? Now I can remove the rest of that dubbing. I'll put an extra wrap in. I can just pull it away, and if I have any left over like I do there, I can just trim it out, and it's no big deal. And I'll put a couple extra wraps in right there in front, and boom, we're ready to roll. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take this pheasant, or these strands of the pheasant tail, and we're going to wrap them right over the top. Ideally, you want it smaller in the back and larger in the front. If you can get that, it can be tough. If it's smaller in the front, which will often happen, don't worry about it. Or if it's even all the way through, don't worry about it. And I'm doing this on the side so you can see, because I want to keep this right in the middle. Let me see if I can loosen that up a little bit. I'm going to lick my fingers again. There we go. So I really want that running right down the middle of the back of the hook shank. We've got one loose wrap in. I'm going to do a second and a third. And now what we can do is kind of collect those, scooch them together. And depending on how long this leftover portion is, I'm starting to run out of room, and to do it effectively on camera can be a little tricky. But you can leave this in and fold it to the back after we put our rib in, and fold it back forward for the wing case. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to trim this out here, because those are starting to get a little short, and we can just come in. I'm going to tie those all down. I'm not going to go any further forward than where I have to tie them down. And you want to make sure that you leave at least a bodkin width behind the eye to build the head. And so now I'm going to bring my thread back. I got a little straggler there. There we go. So next what we're going to do is we're going to grab our piece of thread, and we're going to use this to put in our rib. So this is going to be a super lightweight fly, and we're really looking for 4 to 5 turns here, evenly spaced. We don't have to get super fancy. This is just a generic Mayfly pattern. Go ahead and get 5 since that's where I got it, or the distance that I have. We'll cross that over my thread, put a few turns in, and now we're going to trim this guy out. Alright, so half the battle's done. So my tail's collapsed a little bit here, and that's going to happen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lift this, use my fingers and lift it out and apart. And I want them to splay kind of in this little prong, kind of like you see there. This is a really good time to come in with a little glue. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the glue on my little brush. I'm going to take my bodkin and just swipe it. So I've got a little bit on my bodkin. Actually, I've got quite a bit on my bodkin, but anyhow. Then I'm going to come in and just very gently dab right on top, and you can come in underneath and swipe underneath a little bit so that I've got glue going both ways, or you have glue going both ways. And before it sets, put your tail in where you want it and splay it open the way you want it. You can do this again later. It's going to be a little more difficult once we add the CDC. So now we should be somewhere right in this range. So next, what we need to do is I want to come back to my pheasant tail, and I want to grab this time. You can grab there's 2 tricks to this to get that little split back. You need to have an even amount of fibers on either side to do it effectively. So you can do 4 or 6 or 8, and that way you'll have 3 on either side, or 2 on either side, or 4 on either side, whatever you choose to do. But those are the numbers you need to work with. 4, 6, or 8. And so I'm going to come along. I'm going to pull some right off the side of my stem there. Sorry, my stem's a little long and it's getting in the way of everything here. But here you want to actually count them in order to do this effectively and make it look nice. So here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like I got, yep, I do have 6 there. So I'll use 6. And we're going to do the same thing. We want these to be flat. I'm going to lick them, just like I've done with all the other pheasant tail, and I'm going to kind of pull everything together and forward so that they're flat like so. Okay. Next, I'm going to lay it down right on top and just gently pinch. You got to really gently pinch here. Now I'm going to put a couple of loose turns over. And you need, before you let go of your other thumb and index, this is my left thumb, left index, you need to correct any mistakes before you let go so that it's lined up directly across the back and still is staying together. And now you can kind of shift it into place if you need to a little bit. Mine's not working very well because I'm doing it on the side. If you have your fly standard like this where, you know, it's on the bottom, it works pretty well. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap back, and I want to get back to my dubbing just a little bit. And if you're worried that this isn't tied in well enough, you can flip this over and tie it in again like this and cut it off. It is going to create a little bit of a bubble there, and you'll have to loosen up when you're dubbing when we get back to dubbing. So at this point you should have something that looks about like this. Oh, my tail collapsed just a fuzz again. That's all right. There we go. So next, the CDC. So what I'm going to use here is some ginger CDC. So it's a little feather that looks like this. Now, if you're tying things like a shuttlecock or other, say like a dry fly or something, where you're going to use the tips of your CDC, that's awesome. So either cut. If you're going to use it in the future, I'm trying to get this right, so I don't want to confuse you. So if you're going to use it in the future, or you're going to use these tips in the future, come down into the middle, or 2/3, and you can kind of stroke everything back, just like that. You can trim your CDC feather off here and save this front part for later. On the flip side, if you have already tied something like that, or you've cut the tip off, like so, what you can do is you can take your hackle pliers, you can put it right on the stem, like that. You can draw everything back. So we've got a little, let me get a different feather. That one's kind of beat up. Try to put the cap of my glue back on. I've got a bunch of them here, and of course I can't grab one now. Yeah, that one's a little better. So you have something like that. Okay, I'm going to put my hackle pliers right on the stem. Now I can draw all these fibers to the back. Okay, now you can wet your fingers and do this part too. The only kind of problem with that is CDC is very buoyant, so it kind of rejects water naturally. So we have something along these lines. Okay. Now, you'll notice that there's a concave side, which means there's a natural curve to the feather right here. This is the concave side, or the inner side. You have a convex side, which is the outer side. And we want to tie that convex side down with our cut tip part forward. So just like this. And right where that stem is, I'm going to line it up right on top of my thread. And I'm going to put just a couple of loose wraps over. If you do, again, if you're doing this with your vise in the up position like this, you shouldn't have to make these corrections that I'm making, but I'm trying to show you. So what we're looking to do here is we want to get, you can see I'm pulling it forward. In order to get that split back, I need this beefy part of the stem. A very small, thin part of the CDC stem is not going to work very well to do this. So I need to line it up and have it just right on center, like so. And to make sure it's tied in, I'm going to fold it over, put a couple wraps in, and it rolled on me. It's going to do that. Don't worry about it. If it does, just gently make your correction. These feathers can be a little finicky and they can break easy. And I'm going to come in and trim out that excess right there, or the excess right there. I'm going to take my thread back to where my dubbing started. So at this point you should have everything that looks about like this. Okay, you should have the CDC stem lined up right in the middle of that pheasant tail, and our thread should be right at the back. Next, I'm going to come in and I'm going to take my dubbing that I used before, and I'm going to get just a little bit. We don't need a lot here, because all we're going to do is we're going to use this dubbing to build the thorax. So it can even be a little bit thicker of a dubbing noodle. Honestly, you're probably better off using a little bit thinner of one and adding a little extra than messing around with a bigger dubbing noodle, but I guess it depends on your skill level with dubbing. Now I'm going to start to make my thorax here, which is going to cover all this up. Okay. A little extra fuzz there, that's okay. We can trim some of that out. We need to make sure we leave enough room up front for the head. Right here. This is the part where it's going to get a little tricky. So if you don't have basically a bodkin width right here, you might be in trouble. So back things off and try it again. I'm going to fold this CDC stem forward, and I want it to line up directly over the eye, if you can see that. I want to just grab a bunch of these and start to draw them to the back. Again, I'm going to lick my fingers. I'm just going to kind of draw them to the back. I'm going to turn this vise straight up this time so that when I pull it over, it's going to catch. And it's going to catch right behind the eye. But you can kind of see I've got that stem riding in the middle. So I got to do it without trying to do the demo version of it here in order to get it to stick. Just like so. So we've got all these little fibers hanging off the back. And to adjust it, I can now pull the front side of that CDC and I can move it if I need to. Mine's actually sitting pretty good right here, so I don't need to. What I need to do here is tie this off. And the way I do that is I'm going to pull this to the back. I'm going to put about 3 wraps in front. Nice tight wraps there. I'm going to come back. Again, I'm going to draw this all to the back. I'm going to put another 2 or 3 wraps, progressively working back. Don't lay them on top of one another. Work back. And put a 4th one in there just for funsies. To make sure that I have that tied in, I'm going to get my fingernail clippers, because I really like my fingernail clippers for this kind of stuff, and cut it out. And you can see that I've got that little head there. Now I can jump my thread back forward right behind the eye and just methodically lay each thread wrap to cover all this stuff up. Now's the time to do this little maneuver and not build too big of a head. Okay? Now we're going to pull this guy forward. All of our, you can take your CDC and kind of move it to the side. But now we're going to pull all of our pheasant forward. But it's got to be laying flat to do this. Your pheasant has to be laying flat. If it twists, it's not going to expose your little stem there. So you'll see I'm putting my thumb down on there. I've got this one fiber that's twisting over everything else and just totally messing it up so I can show you. There you go. So as you work it, you can get that stem to pop through. Just like that. Now, if you can't do that right away, don't worry about it. This is just kind of an extra little cool thing that I wanted to show. If yours all just covers it up completely like that, that's perfect. That's really what the fly should be. But as you play around with it and you want to kind of add that little extra touch to your fly, you want to get it to split with your even number on each side, right, of that stem, and that provides that little bubble. And now I can just put a loose wrap in and another loose wrap in, and I'm going to work forward just a fuzz. I want to put a couple of turns in front of I'm sorry, my pheasant tail. Got a little lost in transition there. And I'm going to just work back tight turns, real slow. If they slide off your pheasant tail, it's not a big deal. But we want to have that little V wedge that I always talk about in my other videos so that your fly's sitting like that. Next, we can come in and trim this out. Just like so. And if you've made it this far and you've got your little split wing case or your bubble back or whatever your terminology is for it, you hit a home run. Other than that, all we got to do is keep all these little CDC fibers out of the way, build a little head, and whip finish. Now you can wet whip this if you want, just meaning you're going to put a little glue on first. There we go. So you have something that looks like that. Now you can take your CDC and draw it down. And to finish the fly, we're going to glue the head, and we're going to go back and fix our tail. It's pretty difficult to keep that tail to stay in place the way you want it, but when you add the glue on the first part of it with just a drop, and you come back and you kind of tease it out, it'll pop back open for you. And that's why we add the glue in the first part of it. And it adds that, you know, when you do it with the glue, usually it'll discolor your dubbing and everything back there. And that's okay. That's no big deal. So I'm going to come in and just put a little super glue right in there. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the tail again. Just going to brush a little glue onto my dubbing needle. I want to get my CDC out of the way. So I can kind of mess with this a little bit and get it open to where I want it. Just add a drop on top. And when I do that, I typically come back and add a drop underneath, and I'll kind of swipe it like that just to help it pop open. And there you go. There's a little split wing case, CDC legged, generic Mayfly. You can use a lot of materials other than CDC. We're just doing a class on CDC, and so I wanted to show you how to use it for legs on a nymph. And so that's kind of how you can do it right there. So it's a pretty nice looking little fly. If you liked the video, do me a favor and subscribe. Give it a thumbs up and share it. I'd love for you to share it. Also, you can check us out at Fly Tying for Beginners over on Facebook. Answer the questions, and that's your golden ticket in. We do all kinds of fun stuff over there. Everything from beginner to more advanced techniques. But this is a pretty fun little fly. And again, it's just kind of a generic pattern, so you can get You can get real crazy here with what you want to use for your tail, your dubbing, your wing case, your back, all that stuff. So you can take any materials that you have and build your Mayfly Nymph just like that, and it'll work. It'll be a nice representation. So until the next video, happy tying everybody, and we'll see you later.